guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the mystery that shrouds the apparent suicide of 22-year-old Sheena Morris. Again, her death was actually ruled a suicide, but there have been some things uncovered by her family that leads people to believe otherwise. This case was suggested by Justice For, so thank you for that. I appreciate any suggestions that you guys have. I'd just like to let you know I mean no disrespect to anyone I'm going to talk about today. I've just gathered this information off the internet and compiled it into a video for educational purposes. Sheena Morris was born on the 1st of August in 1986 in Syracuse. I apologise if I said that wrong, but it's in New York, so again, sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Her parents were called Kelly Osborne and David Morris. Now, they actually divorced and they each found their own partners, so Sheena ended up with two step-parents. She was the only child of her parents, but she did gain some stepbrothers on her mother's behalf on her second marriage. Her two stepbrothers were called Ethan and Nolan Osborne. Even though her mother moved away when she was 12, they did remain really close. Sheena actually lived with her dad, David Morris, and her stepmother, Lisa Lane, until she finished high school. Now, Sheena was an absolutely stunning girl. She was described as being able to brighten up any room. She was passionate, she was incredible, and she was such an amazing daughter. She was always really close to her family, she had loads of friends, which she made easily. She was just that kind of person that could just go out and make friends so quickly. Not only that, she was a very passionate dog lover, especially her two lovely dogs who were the breed of Yorkies. At the age of 18, she moved to Tampa, Florida, and that was where her mother lived with her stepdad, and so it was nice for her mum to have her close again. Kelly loved it. She loved having her daughter really close. As I said, they were really close anyway, even though they lived apart, but having her daughter then move closer again, it just sort of bonded their relationship even more, and they were kind of inseparable. Her and her father, again, she no longer lived in the area, but she spoke to him every day. She texted him every day. She still kept in close contact with him too. She also loved her step-parents dearly, and so she kept in touch with Lisa too. At the age of 20, she began dating a man named Joe Genoise. He was a successful contractor, and friends said that they had this healthy relationship, but her mum didn't trust him. When they began dating, he claimed that he was 25, which she was like, no way, you're not 25. And looking at the pictures, I can see why she thought that. I know sometimes people look older than they are, younger than they are, but to me, in the pictures at least, he looks it to be in his 40s, which he actually was. He was lying about his age. He was actually 43 years old and Sheena was 20 at the time. So that's him being 23 years her senior. I know they're obviously two consenting adults, and you know, relationships with a big age gap often do work, but it just wasn't a conventional relationship. They constantly fought, they broke up, they got back together, they broke up, they got back together, and this was over the course of the 2 years of their relationship. Each time they broke up, her family would think this was the last time, and then they would get back together again, and they just had to accept it. It was their daughter's life. She could do whatever she wanted, and so it was her choice to get back with him, and if she wanted to get back with Joe, then she would. And that was that. They did mostly get on with Joe, but again, the couple would argue a lot, and Kelly didn't like seeing her daughter in a relationship like that, and I can't blame her for that. When they did break up, Sheena would move on. She would go and date other guys, probably more around her age, and seemingly would move on from Joe. Now, Joe couldn't. Joe would just keep constantly berating her with messages, texts, trying to get her back basically. And a lot of the time it worked. He couldn't move on, whereas Sheena could. As I said, Kelly didn't really like him. She wanted the best for her daughter, and she didn't think that this man who initially lied about his age, he already had 3 kids and was going through a very, very bad divorce at the time. They argued all the time, the relationship was toxic, and she believed that that wasn't the best for her daughter, which I can understand completely. During their breakup, he harassed her so much that she was in tears over it. One time, her mother explained that Sheena was out with one of her boyfriends, and Joe just walked straight into the restaurant. He comes up to their table and he says to her boyfriend, "How does it make you feel that she's wearing the watch that I bought her?" Some of her friends also said that they had seen Joe sitting outside in his car and he was stalking her. So again, he just really couldn't move on, but he's exhibiting these behaviours that are not good. They are stalker behaviour and they are really not good. However, even though they had a rocky relationship, during the winter of 2008, Joe just proposes to Sheena and she accepts. Obviously, her family weren't really pleased about it. Not after everything he'd done, not only that, it was completely out of the blue. And those around her that knew her thought it was very strange. So normally with a proposal, they plan it. They plan this big spectacle a lot of the time. They get down on one knee, they propose. They try and make it as nice as they can, but apparently with him there was no big proposal. He didn't have anything planned, and that's how Sheena was. So she would have loved to have this massive plan, this massive romantic proposal, and that is not what she got. One of her friends, Kelly Holland, actually stated that he imagined her being super excited to tell her that she was engaged and that she was getting married, but the way that he found out was after they'd had an argument in a bar or something, I believe. Her and Joe, she was stood outside, he was talking to her, and then he looks down at her hand and notices a ring on her finger. She didn't even tell him, one of her really good friends. And it was really strange. It wouldn't actually surprise me the reason she didn't tell him is because he didn't do this big proposal. Or another reason could be that she didn't actually want to marry him. She begins planning the wedding and she knew exactly what she wanted. She wanted it at Bradenton Beach in Florida on Anna Maria Island. Kelly, her mother, helps her plan a wedding, despite her feelings that her daughter didn't really seem excited about it and just seemed more like aggravated, like it was all just a big pain. On another occasion, Kelly, Joe, and Sheena were all going out for a meal. So as they're driving along, Sheena gets a text from one of her ex-boyfriends. Now, Kelly had actually made friends with, I believe he was called Sal. Sal and Kelly were friends, and he didn't have Kelly's number, and so he texts Sheena in order to get Kelly's number. But Joe sees it, and he reacts really badly to it. He gets all jealous, he is so angry, and Kelly hadn't actually ever seen him like that before. Joe scraps their plans, he turns the car around, and he begins to drive back. He gets more and more angry. He makes Sheena actually call back Sal because he couldn't believe that her ex-boyfriend, who didn't even want her, had text her, so he was fuming and he wasn't going to stand for it. He then eventually took over the phone, he shouted at him, saying don't talk to her again, and if he did, he basically threatened his life. Joe then ends up pulling a gun out of the glove box and was fuming. He said that he wanted to find him that very same night. It all escalated really quickly and unnecessarily. It was over nothing. Sheena ran to her apartment and locked the door. She locked Kelly out. He goes up, he bangs on the door, he wants to come in. She basically says that I'm not letting Joe in with that gun. Eventually, Kelly convinces him to put the gun back, and all three of them go inside. He apologises for his behaviour, for acting so insanely, and out they go to dinner together. It was coming up to Christmas, and Sheena would normally spend Christmas with her family. But this year, of course, she wanted to spend it with a new fiancé. Lisa, her stepmother, really tried to encourage her to come over for Christmas. And it made Sheena sad, because she wanted to go over there for Christmas like she normally would, but she also wanted to spend it with Joe and didn't want to leave him on his own. On the 19th of December, the pair go to New York to celebrate his 45th birthday. They got back a few days later. On the 23rd of July, Sheena visits her mother after she had gotten into yet another argument with Joe. They spend the day Christmas shopping and having a really fun day, but her phone doesn't stop ringing. He just keeps ringing it over and over, and she just says that she's not going to answer. She said, I'm not talking to him. Her mother said she wasn't upset or anything, she just didn't want to talk to him. Christmas morning, Kelly rings Sheena and she doesn't answer. So then she eventually does ring Joe and she tells him to get Sheena over to her house. If she's not spending it at her father's, she's spending it with her mother's. She told him that he needed to get her here and there was no two ways about it. Get her here right now. So they get there and she instantly sees that they're both very uncomfortable. They're clearly not speaking to each other again. Throughout the day though, the tensions get a lot better and Kelly's there with her camera. She said that she never actually normally films anything, but this day she's messing around with it, she's filming things, and then all of a sudden Joe takes her ring back off her, gets down on one knee, and formally proposes to her again.
You need to take that ring off this first time.
They got a safety thing at it?
Because it doesn't look good.
Huh?
I haven't done this yet, but... Oh, you?
We're like, what?
Marry me.
Yes.
Of course.
This was very strange. Why did he propose twice? This time, right in front of a family and right in front of the camera. It was really, really weird. Anyway, they both go home eventually as the night ends, and they get into yet another argument, and Sheena actually calls off the engagement. She'd had enough. She states to her friends that she's happy, she's finally relieved that she can finally move on and date men of her own age. Joe persistently calls her once more, trying to get her back. And eventually she gives in again, because he is sly. He promises to take her to the place where she had dreamed of actually having her wedding, on Anna Maria Island. So he books into Bradenton Beach in a beachside hotel, and this hotel wasn't actually pet friendly, and Sheena absolutely adored the dogs. She took them everywhere. She didn't want to go because the dogs couldn't, but Joe just said that they would sneak them in, and so she agreed to go. Kelly was really confused because Sheena was supposed to be spending New Year's with her, and she thought they were over. And here they are again, together again, and now she's spending New Year's with him. On the 29th of December, Sheena attended a celebration of her life for her friend Kyle Locke that had actually passed away the year before. Even though obviously it's a sad event, they were all looking at pictures and enjoying remembering the good times that they had with their friend. And it was said that nobody was overly distraught or upset, including Sheena. The next day, on the 30th of December in 2008, just hours before she would go on this trip with Joe, she goes around to her mother's house. Little did Kelly know it would be the last time that she would see her daughter alive again. She said she was excitedly making plans for New Year's. She was excitedly planning flights to go to New York because her cousin was due to give birth very shortly. Her cousin was called Ashley, and she was going to go over and help her with the baby. She had made all of these plans for the future. She had paid rent, she'd re-signed up for her subscriptions, renewing all her services and setting everything up to come back. So obviously they bid their farewells and Sheena and Joe head off. Earlier on, everything seemed to be really good. They both enjoyed each other's company, they go shopping, and they buy clothes and shoes. Meanwhile, Kelly starts to get these strange texts from Joe. They seem to come from Sheena's phone originally, but were being forwarded from Joe to Kelly. She calls him and asks what they're all about, but he doesn't really give her an answer about it. It's actually believed that Sheena was texting Joe and Joe was forwarding them to someone, and maybe he accidentally forwarded them to Kelly. Again, we don't know. According to witnesses, the couple spends the evening at the beach house restaurant. She's seemingly happy, in really good spirits, but the waitress has stated that Joe was just seemingly moped over in his drinks. Now, he had planned this trip, he wanted to go, and he's miserable. And Sheena was just acting all happy and normal. She's texting her friends, she's texting her loved ones, saying Happy New Year to them, enthusiastically talking about, obviously, Ashley giving birth to her baby, and just excited about all the plans she had. According to the reports, the pair, after watching the fireworks, returned to their hotel room at the Bridgewalk Hotel, which is now the early morning of 2009. Around an hour later, inside the couple's room, other hotel guests hear all of this shouting, all of these arguments. It went on for a very long time and it was so loud. The other guests heard these and they were worried enough to ring the police.
We're in the room next door and there's some kind of a domestic thing going on, and there's two people over there just screaming and yelling, a woman and a man at each other.
Do you know if anyone has any weapons or if
I don't think so. Well, she's hollering at him about money and he's hollering. I don't know.
According to the guests, they were actually arguing about money. When Joe was questioned about this, according to him, Sheena was angry at him because he called one of his children at 1 a.m. to wish them Happy New Year. And that's what the argument was about. Other hotel guests later on stated that they heard him say in this monotone, emotionless voice, "Give me back my money, bitch." To which she replied, "I told you I don't have it," and that she'd lost it on the beach. So there were a few witnesses that said that heard him say that, and so it would seem that this argument was over money and not over Sheena getting angry that he was calling his kid at 1 a.m. As the police arrive, Joe is leaving. The two officers walked past him on the stairs and they didn't stop him. He just got into the car and drove off. At this point, they didn't know that that was Joe. But I've watched a lot of videos on this and there was an official police spokesperson, investigator, who stated that they should have questioned him. I'm not so sure about that because, again, he could have been anyone. They didn't know him, but I don't know how that is in regards to the law, whether they can just stop anyone and ask them who they were. I don't know. Now, Sheena tells him that he's drunk, amongst other things, but she tells him that he's drunk. So they've just witnessed him drive off. Once she gives the description of him and the description of the car, they know it's him, and they've just witnessed him drive off. She tells them that he is drunk, so he's driving under the influence, and they don't do anything about it. They don't investigate. They don't send anyone out after him. At the very least, they should have found him and arrested him for driving under the influence. He could have knocked some innocent person down whilst he's intoxicated and driving around. But they didn't. They just didn't bother doing anything. Sheena calls 911 herself a little bit later on.
I'm in Manatee County right now. I was on vacation for the holiday with my fiance, and we have two separate homes. He's on the way to my home apparently right now. He took off with my car keys and my house keys, and he said he was going to destroy my house.
And in this call, she tells police that Joe made her bleed and caused claw marks on her body.
Had deputies come out here because he did physically hurt me. He does not have permission to enter my home. He doesn't even have his own key.
Okay, what is his name?
His name is Joe Genoise. I filled out a police report here in Manatee County because he did make me bleed and left claw marks all over me and stuff. I filled out a police report here about 30 minutes ago, but I just...
After this, she then calls her fiance
and said, you know, how could you leave me here? You took my keys, you took my money, you took everything, because he took my entire purse. And now he's like, I'm going to go to your house and ruin your house. You ruined my life.
Okay, we'll be on the way there to go check up on it, okay?
Thank you.
After this, she then texts her fiance at 1:46 a.m. She says, I can't believe you fucking left me here. Joe doesn't respond until 2:28 a.m. I don't want to be with someone like you. These messages are not back and forth like you normally would assume. So generally you send a text, they reply to that text. Maybe you send two in the time, but it's back and forth. It's not one person sending a load and then the other person sending a load. That's not generally how it works. Obviously, if they're ignoring them, then they're not going to reply, but he did reply eventually. But like I said, he sends all of his text, she sends all of her texts, and then he sends all of his texts. After this, she doesn't make any other texts, any other calls, and according to the police, Sheena hangs herself shortly after this. At 4 a.m, her phone receives a text message that her cousin had just given birth to a healthy baby girl, which is a text she never gets to see. A little later on, Joe calls Kelly to say that he can't get in touch with Sheena. She drives over to her apartment, she's concerned. Sheena was a very social girl and she would always keep in touch with people, and so she wouldn't really ignore people, and it was strange. As she's going down there, she gets this call apparently from Sheena's phone, but it's not Sheena. She answers and she gets no response when she calls her daughter's name. The only thing she can hear is a man's voice in the background. Kelly begins panicking when she realizes that this man is actually a police officer. He apparently had accidentally called her, and then he went on to say that they needed her address. So she gets this call off Joe saying that he can't get in touch with her, and then a call off Sheena's own mobile off a police officer, and it was really, really, really weird and worrying. Joe's also contacted to meet at Kelly's house, and when everyone was there, that is when the police broke the devastating news that Sheena had been found dead in a hotel. Her dogs were also found in the hotel too, and as you can imagine, Kelly was shell-shocked. She was utterly heartbroken and she demanded to know what had happened to her daughter. Eventually, she did find out that her daughter's cause of death was hanging. The police had actually found her hanging off her shower with her dog's blue lead wrapped around her neck, wrapped around the top of the shower, and she was found fully clothed. It was a complete shock. She felt like it was not something that her daughter would ever do. She had so much to look forward to. She was making all these plans, including a marriage. The police didn't find any sign of struggle in the hotel, and as a result, the officer, who was apparently quite new at the job, just walked in there, saw no sign of a struggle, saw her hanging in the shower, and just ruled it as a suicide straight away. It was said that they couldn't prove whether it was a homicide or a suicide, but that they just ruled it a suicide anyway. They couldn't prove it because the officers gave false information. Immediately, Detective Leonard Diaz closes the case. The Braden police would go on to say that the celebration of life that she attended was proof that Sheena had been depressed over the holiday season. They also never remarked on the text that Sheena was sending to her family and friends on how happy she was and how excited she was for the future of making plans with Ashley and a baby girl that was due. They made no remarks to those whatsoever. A lot of people in this case believe that there is a lot of shoddy police work involved in it. Obviously, that's up to you to make your own minds on that. Her family was devastated, but they were certain that that ruling did not make sense. A few days after her death, Kelly arranged to meet Joe in her garage, and she told him it wasn't over and that she knew her daughter didn't kill herself. So she truly does believe that Joe did it. And as a result of this, she was kind of a mother on a mission, and she began investigating her own daughter's death herself because the police had ruled it a suicide, closed the case, and wouldn't do anything else on it. She eventually uncovered the 911 call that Sheena made herself, which she never was actually told by Detective Diaz that this call had actually occurred. She was only informed about the 911 call that was made by the hospital guests. But apparently these detectives had Sheena's phone, and so they had all the call history. They could have seen that she made this 911 call, but they didn't have a clue that she'd made it, which is just another failing by the police. They only found out about this call when Kelly found it. Does the call I played earlier really sound like a woman that a few hours later would violently kill themselves? Kelly went on to find the text that Sheena had sent to Joe, calling him evil and scary and telling him not to put his hands on other women. She also found the photos that Sheena had taken of herself that Joe had done to her that night and that he had physically harmed her. Kelly was certain that the investigation had been botched from the start, and she called Detective Diaz to ask if he had actually interviewed Joe. He just told her flat out no, and then had the audacity to say, "Should I?" It was 22 days after Sheena's death that Joe was finally interviewed by the police. It was never recorded, a written report wasn't ever made of it, there was no record of it at all. But regardless of that, he claimed that after their argument and the first police call, he drove the hour home and that his townhouse tenant had seen him. The police didn't verify this alibi at the time. Maybe they just had something better to investigate than a possible murder. Who knows? After years of her family fighting to get a case looked into, an investigative reporter, Lee Williams, who used to be a former detective and worked at the Herald Times, began looking into the case, and he wrote up all these stories, and it caught the attention of the national media. He went and he asked the tenant himself whether he'd seen Joe that night. Now, the tenant did say, yes, I did see Joe that night, but he couldn't remember what time it was. So, how is that an alibi? He didn't know what time he saw Joe. Yes, he did see Joe at some point, but when? Who knows? Police did claim that they had the pings of Joe's phone that proved his innocence, but they were never released and they were just kept hidden somewhere. Lee and Kelly ended up looking at the photos that were taken of, obviously, the scene. The images of her daughter's body must have been so horrific and heartbreaking to look at, but she wanted to get to the bottom of this case and what had happened to her, and so she looked at them anyway. As soon as Lee saw these photos, looking at the position of her body, he instantly thought that it looked like a staged crime scene. Now, viewing the photos, they noticed that Sheena's makeup around her eyes was immaculate. So, within a lot of suicides, they end up really teary and really emotional and crying before they actually do it. And Sheena hadn't done that. Now, obviously that's not abnormal. She may have killed herself and not cried about it, but it's very unusual. According to the experts, it's very, very rare to not see tears after a suicide. There was also a bracelet that was on her right wrist, which she always wore on the left. Now, obviously, Some people that might not be really significant, but at least to me, if I wear some jewelry on, say, my right wrist, if I put it on my left, it feels so abnormal, so strange, and I can't stand it. It has to go back where it should be, where I put it in the first place. And whether that was the case for Sheena, I don't know. But normally as well, a lot of people don't actually take the jewelry off. So if you have a bracelet on, people tend to keep it on all the time. Now, the bathroom was left open, and Kelly was convinced that Sheena would never, ever, ever do something like that in front of her dogs. So the bathroom was left open, and the dogs were able to wander in and out and see her like that. And she was adamant that it's something that she would never do. She adored those dogs. They were babies, and so she would have never done that. The thing that really got me, that I found really, really weird, was that her feet were covered in sand, and yet there was no sand anywhere in the bathroom. If you go outside and your feet are covered in sand, and then you walk inside barefoot, still full of sand, there's going to be a trail. It's going to be on the floor. I'm sorry, but it is. I don't get it. If she had sandy feet, how on earth did she get over to the shower without leaving even a minute amount of sand on that bathroom floor? Did she levitate over there or something? Because that is the only way that she would have got over there, to have then killed herself and not got any sand on the floor. Not only that, her pajama bottoms were actually tucked under the heels of her feet. So if you imagine someone dragging someone, their clothes are actually gonna, as they're being pulled backwards, go under the heels of their feet, and that's how she was found. So to me, that really does indicate that she may have been dragged there. I find it highly unlikely that as she is strangling herself, her pajama bottoms end up under her heels perfectly, as though she'd been dragged there. Another thing that was actually noticed by Lee was that the blood vessels in her eyes were popped, and that is a massive indication of manual strangling rather than hanging. Eventually, they did change a ruling that her death was by hanging, but that her cause of death was undetermined rather than a suicide. Detective Diaz went on to tell Kelly that that ruling was just an opinion, which is just ridiculous. She either committed suicide or she didn't. Murder, suicide. It's one or the other. There's a video of Diaz actually saying to Kelly, "You just can't accept that your daughter killed herself." And in it, he just seemed really cocky. To me, at least, anyway. In 2013, because of all the media attention, because of all the hype, they were kind of forced to reinvestigate a case again. And shockingly, they came to the same conclusion. They apparently found nothing wrong with how the lead investigator handled the case. Several years after Sheena's death, it was discovered that 6 months after her death, Joe was charged with assaulting his ex-wife. However, the charges were dropped. At some point, Sheena's parents and Joe appeared on the show Dr. Phil, in which he took a polygraph in front of the nation, and he failed it. Of course, they're not 100% accurate, and they can't be admissible in court because of that. But he was asked 2 questions. He was asked if he killed Sheena or if he had anything to do with her death, to which he replied no. And both those answers were found to be deceptive. He pretty much went on to say that the show set him up, and the questions were set-up questions, which I don't get. How is somebody asking if you killed someone a set-up question? It just doesn't make any sense. Not only that, on the show as well, they discussed the time when Kelly was in the car and they were all going to lunch and Joe pulled out a gun. He denied ever having any knowledge of pulling out that gun. He had a license, he admitted that he had a gun, but he doesn't remember when he pulled it out, conveniently. Later on, Joe claimed that Sheena was jealous of his ex-wife and his family, and that Sheena was actually very depressed. Convenient, Joe. The State Attorney General's office announced that it would look into a case in September of 2019. The most recent evidence in this case that I could find are these lividity marks that were basically on Sheena's back and buttocks. And her mother speaks about them, and Kelly truly believes that these were caused after Sheena had died. So she believes that they are matching perfectly to this wicker chair, and that after she had died, being murdered, because that is what she believes her daughter was murdered by Joe. So after Joe murdered her, he then placed her in this chair and she was left there for hours, and that is how she got these marks before obviously he staged the scene of suicide. That is Kelly's belief. Please just let me put that out there. I'm not accusing him of that, because that is just what her family believe. She went on to say, I don't think it takes any sort of expert to look at these photos and see that Sheena died in that chair. Was there for several hours and then placed in the shower. State Attorney Ed Brodsky, who was taking a closer look at the case, says that Florida Attorney General's Office of Statewide Prosecution has agreed to review the case. He stated that we have kept an open mind and nothing is more important to me than a search for the truth, a quest for the truth and to seek justice. Kelly stated that she would soon be releasing more powerful evidence and that she's feeling that there's a little more hope now that it's in the hands of the Attorney General's office. She went on to say, my gut tells me a lot and it feels good right now. This will now be the 5th investigation into Sheena Morris's death. The last information I could find was from January 2020. I couldn't find anything more recent than that. So I don't know the outcome of this, whether they are still looking into it, whether they have once more ruled it as a suicide. I don't know. If you guys see any more information on it, then please let me know and I'll try and keep myself updated on it. And if I find any more info, I will either do another video if it's an update video or do a pinned comment on this video just to keep you guys updated. But as far as I can tell, that is all the information there is out there at the moment. I truly hope though that the truth comes out. It's been 11 years since her death. And I don't know, there's just quite a lot of damning things to go towards Joe having killed her. Like the way he was acting, how he behaved, his stalker behavior, how he couldn't let go, how he would hit her, you know, you've seen the pictures. He scratched her. Who knows what else he did to her? She's going on about how he won't ever lay a hand on a woman, so who knows how frequently he did that. He seems like an aggressive, violent man, and maybe he did do something to Sheena. Of course, I'm not accusing anyone by any means. All I've done is gather the information off the internet as much as I could find, and this is just a picture it paints. Again, Sheena could have killed herself. She could have been in that frame of mind. Maybe she was depressed. Maybe she'd had enough. And maybe she just decided that that was that and she took her own life. Let's try and spread awareness of this case in the hopes that the truth, whatever it is, whether it be that she did kill herself or that she was murdered, let's hope that it will be revealed. I hope her family do find what happened to her and gain closure. Although I have the feeling that if they rule it suicide again, I don't think they'll ever get closure from that. It's heartbreaking what happened to Sheena, whether she took her own life or whether she was murdered. Obviously we don't know, but she was 22, she was beautiful and she had all of these plans, she had a whole life ahead of her and she just had so much to look forward to and it's just tragic. So what do you guys think on the case? Do you think that Sheena actually did kill herself, or do you think that maybe Joe did it or somebody else had something to do with her death? But yeah, that's the end of the case. If you guys have any more suggestions, let me know. I'll look into them for you. Give me a big thumbs up if you've enjoyed this video. Subscribe to my channel for similar content. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the case of Sheena Morris. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.